Hello dear student teachers, welcome to the session. As a part of this workshop sessions, today we are going to learn about micro teaching. I am Dr. Anupama, Assistant Professor of Special Education, Tamil Nadu Open University, Chennai. After completion of this session, you will be in a position to explain about the need and importance of the micro teaching, process of micro teaching cycle, and various micro teaching skills. Micro teaching can be considered as a technique which helps us to improve our teaching skills. At macro level, we are all experienced. Our teacher will explain a concept. She will introduce a concept, explain a concept, probe questions, manage the class, use stimulus variations, use black chalkboard, etc. Whereas during the micro teaching, we are going to take each skill at a time and practice and subsume the skill. That's why micro teaching is called as a scaled down teaching encounter. While saying the genesis of this micro teaching concept, first time it was introduced at Stanford University by Allen and his group during 1963. Micro teaching helps us to develop our new skills as well as redefine our existing ones. As we mentioned earlier, this micro teaching from the macro level to micro teaching, it is limited to the time. That is, in macro level we will be having 40 minutes session, whereas in micro level it will be 5 to 10 minutes session. And regarding the content also, at macro level we will be having much content, whereas at micro teaching we will consider only one concept, either to introduce a concept, then how to develop that concept, like that. And the number of pupils also, since it's a micro, the students will be confined to our peer group or the real students, but it will be limited in number. And also, while using this micro teaching, we will concentrate only one skill at a time. The steps of micro teaching indicating us the first two steps is related to the teacher educator. That means during the first step, the teacher educator will explain the purpose and components of the skills during this micro teaching. During the second step, the teacher educator will demonstrate of a particular skill in front of the student teachers, that is you. So these two steps are related to the teacher educators, whereas the remaining steps are related to you. During the third step, the student teacher will plan a micro teaching. During the fourth step, they will teach to the peer group or the real students based on the demonstration they were observed previously. During the fifth step, after planning teaching to the students, she or he will get the feedback from the peer group. Based on the feedback, during the sixth step, again you have to replan to increase your proficiency. During the seventh step, again you will reteach to the students to the same group or the another group. During the eighth step, again you will get the re-feedback on your presentation. Based on that one, the cycle will be repeatedly moving on up to you subsume that skill effectively. That's why in the next slide it is clearly explained. First you will plan the lesson, you will teach, feedback you will get, again based on the feedback you will replan, reteach, re-feedback, again replan, like that until you get proficiency in that skill. The cycle will be moving on. Alan and Rian, they have listed many skills at macro teaching level, but all these skills will be, each one at a time will be practiced. So, but at present in our sessions, we are going to practice few skills like they used to call as core teaching skills. The first one is skill of explaining. That means how the teacher is explaining a concept to the students. So the concentration purely oriented towards the explaining, that how you are developing the concept, how you are managing the class, how you are illustrating, like that. Everything will consider in the skill of explaining. The next one is illustrating with examples. When you are explaining a concept, how you are relating that concept towards their known concepts, that is with examples, how you are relating that one. So focus will be more on the examples, how you are relating, associating the concepts. The next skill is stimulus variation. While teaching, we are communicating our ideas to the students regarding a concept. It shouldn't be at a monotone. So there should be some stimulus variations. So there should be some variations in your presentation. How you are using those stimulus variations will be focused upon in this skill. The next one is skill of probing questions. So in our classroom while the teaching learning process is going on, we probe some questions. We ask some questions to the students. The main intention of the probing questions is to know whether the students are following or not, as well as to know the students are attentive or not. So for this purpose we use to probe the questions, but there are some skills which we have to develop, like we shouldn't ask the same student, or we shouldn't ask the next one like that. We shouldn't ask. We should ask the zigzagging way, and we should ask by the our what to say, seeing the particular student and ask the questions. It shouldn't be like that. So all these items which do's and don'ts for each skill will be explained later. Again, we are going to do all those simulated practices during our face-to-face mode sessions. This is orientation. That's why. So we are just simply knowing about what is it like. Okay. So during the stimulus variation, all these things as well as probing questions, these things will be done. Then skill of reinforcement. During the reinforcement, we use it to give the reinforcement to the students for the correct answers or the wrong answers. So by that, the student will be in a position to know whether they are correct or wrong. So reinforcement may be positive or negative, but reinforcement should be in the classroom transaction. The next skill is classroom management. How we are managing the classroom, how we are grabbing their attention towards our explanation, towards our teaching is important. And the last one is skill of using chalkboard. So while writing the concepts on the chalkboard, so how it should be, do's and don'ts again. So where we have to write, how we have to write, how legibly we have to write. Why? Because after completion of our class, when we are going to recap to the students, so all the concepts should be on the chalkboard. So even if the student has noted all those concepts, when they went home and they just want to refer also, the concepts which the items or the words which they have written in their notebooks should give the total idea what happened in the classroom to the students. So that how the chalkboard work should be, it should also we should know. As mentioned, each and every skill will have certain components. Based on these components, whether the student has practiced all those items or not will be checked out. For example, explaining. For the explaining skill, the content should have clarity, the way of presentation should have relevant to the content, and it has to be have the continuity and concluding statements covering essential points. All these things will be considered for the skill of explaining. For illustrating with examples, that concept or the illustration should be simple, relevant, interesting, and use of some index and deductive approaches also we should have to use. Then for the stimulus variation, our body movements as a teacher, how we are, whether we are so rigid or how we are moving, our body gestures, change in speech pattern, whether it is raising intonation or how we are showing variations in our teaching. Oral and visual switching, pausing, focusing, all these things will be considered for stimulus variation. Whereas for reinforcement, use of praising words and statements, accepting and using pupils' idea, repeating and rephrasing, extra vertical cues, use of pleasant and approving gestures and expressions, writing pupils' answers on the chalkboard, all these things will be considered for the reinforcement. Coming to the probing questions, whether that question is probing, prompting, seeking further information, redirecting, focusing, increasing critical awareness, we should ask like that we have to ask further information. Then for classroom management, we should call the students by names, make norms of classroom behavior, attending behavior reinforced, clarity of direction, check non-attending behavior. We have to, while managing the classroom, we have to consider all these things, even eye span also. While coming to the use of chalkboard, as I mentioned earlier, it should be legible, neat and adequate with references. So all these things should be considered. There will be some simulated activities also, and this slide indicating about how the student teaches has, whether he or she has subsumed that skill or not. This is the pro forma which we are going to provide to the peer group as well as the special educator or the supervisor who observe the student teacher during their teaching, micro teaching or reteaching. To give the feedback or re-feedback, this is the pro forma that they have to give that checklist and they have to give that ratings. So if the student has been subsumed that they got the full marks, that means good marks, then the student can be considered that the skill has been subsumed by the student. Otherwise they have to do it again and again. So for that purpose, these pro formas are going to be provided to you during your micro teaching sessions, which are going to be held during our face-to-face mode classes. To conclude the session, so during these sessions we have learnt about the concept of micro teaching and the cycle of micro teaching and various skills of micro teaching. Thank you.